Welcome, everybody. It was a wonderful performance, and I think we're going to shift gears a little bit right now. My name is Heather Spalding, and I'm Deputy Director of the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association. And I want to welcome everybody here to our public policy teach-in, and also want to thank all of the volunteers who make this fair possible. The volunteers are really the heart and soul of our organization more broadly, and definitely the Common Ground Country Fair. And we have a lot of volunteers who work to pull this public policy teach-in together. I also wanted to thank the Broad Reach Fund and the Butler Conservation Fund for the support they've given MOFGA to do our public policy work. So we're really supported in a lot of different ways and really appreciate it. And thank you for the policy engagement work that you do. This year we actually did a new thing with our, trying to be inclusive and have productive, constructive policy conversations. So we created an elections and agriculture tent, which is just over that way, encouraging all people who are on the ballot this year in Maine and all registered parties to come and talk to fairgoers about the future of Maine agriculture and the vision that they have to construct, to develop and implement really good policy. So it's a trial, and if anybody's interested in helping us build that area for future years, we would love to have your involvement. And one other little bit of thanks and appreciation is to another one of our partners, which is Revision Energy, who has worked really closely with us. And if you might not have known this, but we are we're powered by the sun fully. So year-round for MOFGA and for all 3 days of Common Ground Country Fair, all of our power that we use is through a solar array of photovoltaics that you'll see around in various areas on the fairgrounds. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. MOFGA, Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, we envision a future of healthy ecosystems, communities, people, and economies sustained by the practices of organic agriculture. And since the beginning, we started in 1971, and we've been doing public policy work and actively educated government leaders and the general public about lots of different policy initiatives, whether they are environmental issues or farm profitability issues. The gamut. We've been trying to engage on good policy for the future. And we do this at all different levels, the state level, the federal level, municipal level, and even some work internationally where we work in solidarity with communities and farmers, really regardless of geographic boundaries. If we have a common mission or a common goal, we want to work with people. And so today's program, I think, is a really good example of that positive collaborative work that we're doing. And so that's why this year, for the first time, I think, we are co-hosting our public policy teach-in, and we're doing that with Maine Farmland Trust. And we're going to hear a little bit more about Maine Farmland Trust, but they are, one of MOFGA's very close partners for a lot of the work that we do. Our mission overlaps in a lot of ways. And Maine Farmland Trust is working really hard to revitalize Maine's rural landscape and to keep agricultural lands in agricultural production. And so it's really great to be able to work with them. And I also have had the privilege of working with Ellen, who I will introduce a little bit more in a second, but on both state and federal policy. And also with Amanda Beal, who is somewhere around here. Oh, she's over there, yeah. So Amanda, who's the president of Maine Farmland Trust, and so we're really appreciative of having this opportunity. So today's public policy teach-in is entitled Today's Agriculture, an Important Piece of Maine's Economic Development Strategy. And we're going to focus on the on creating an agricultural policy platform for Maine's next governor and legislature. And now I'll introduce our panelists who have very, very graciously offered to participate and share their incredible knowledge and experience. So Ellen Stern-Griswold is sitting right next to me here, and she is the Maine Farmland Trust Policy and Research Director. And she's going to explain a little bit about how this initiative has come together for creating a new platform for Maine's agricultural future. And next to Ellen is Penny Jordan of Jordan's Farm in Cape Elizabeth. And Penny also serves as the president of the Maine Farm Bureau. She's going to talk with us about the critical need for really strong, really good policy implementation that helps the profitability for Maine farm operations, Maine farmers, and help them succeed in the marketplace. And next to Penny is Ben Whalen, who is the co-owner of Bumbleroot Organic Farm in Windham. And Ben has participated in a number of different programs that both MOFGA and Maine Farmland Trust have. He was a journey person for MOFGA. He's a member of the Southern Maine Young Farmers Coalition. He's a former board officer of farmers markets in Kittery and Saco. And he's going to cover issues like the challenges and the incredible opportunities that are facing Maine's next generation of farmers. And then on what is it, stage left? Stage left? I always get that mixed up. Anyway, down at the end is Jim Gerritsen, and many of you know Jim. He's done just an incredible amount of work in the organic farming movement, in seed saving, and in policy development at all levels. And Jim is a longtime MOFGA member. He is a past MOFGA board member. He's one of the earliest MOFGA-certified organic farmers. And he started Wood Prairie Farm up in Bridgewater back in the early 70s. Is that right? Yeah. I don't know the exact year, but and he's now president of Usda, the Organic Seed Growers and Trade Association. And he's going to talk about the agricultural policy in the interest of people, ecosystems, communities, and local economies. So I will moderate, and we'll try to get through this. We have about an hour and 15 minutes to go through this discussion, and we want to have a little time at the end for a Q&A discussion if time allows. And another thing that's happening right now, I want to be as brief as I can, but you may have heard that there's a farm bill in play, and this isn't specifically related to this panel right now. I mean, everything is interrelated, but we're hearing that it's very unlikely that Congress is going to be able to pass a farm bill before September 30th, which is when the deadline for passing the 2018 Farm Bill. And we're very concerned about this because there are a number of really important programs that are funded by the Farm Bill, and those programs will cease to have administrative funding for them if Congress can't get together and work out a really productive compromise agreement. And we have a little action alert that Abby has. I'm not sure who's around. Oh, there she is. Sorry. So Abby can pass those out, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into too much detail on the Farm Bill because we want to have as much time to talk about this topic that we came here to discuss today. But there is a little handout and some guidance on what we would like you to convey to the congressional delegation about the importance of passing a strong farm bill. So with that, I would like Ellen to kick us off. Thank you.
Hi, as Heather said, my name is Ellen Stern-Griswold. I'm the Policy and Research Director at Maine Farmland Trust, and I just wanted to say thank you to Heather and to MOFGA for organizing this panel. I'm just, as Heather mentioned, Maine Farmland Trust is a member-based statewide organization that works to protect farmland, support farmers, and advance the future of farming. I'm just going to give a very brief overview of a process that has been underway for about a year to create a state-based agriculture policy platform, and I'll describe what that really means in a minute. And then I'm just going to kick it over to the farmers to really talk about the policy needs that they're seeing on the ground. So about a year ago, several organizations that work in agriculture came together to try and create a list of policy ideas or policy changes that they felt were really needed to better support agriculture in Maine and to grow the agricultural economy in Maine. And the idea was that these organizations would kind of create a list of their ideas and then share it with farmers and other ag stakeholders to get their feedback on, what was missing, what was included that was problematic, and through that feedback process really refine the document to then share with the next state administration. Those organizations included MOFGA and MFT, the Maine Farm Bureau, CEI, the Maine Food Strategy, Cultivating Community, NISAS, Good Shepherd Food Bank. I think that's all of them. So the groups met several times, and this spring we created an initial draft of the platform that was at first pretty detailed. We then created an online survey where farmers and others could weigh in on this draft, and we received a lot of really great feedback, both half of which were from farmers and the other half from other ag stakeholders. And based upon that feedback, we realized that what we needed to do was create a sort of broader, more consensus-based version of the document that was a little bit higher level, and I'll describe what that means in a minute. And then organize a really robust outreach effort to farmers across the state to get their input on what was really needed in terms of policy change in the state to better support agriculture. And Abby is also going to hand out a copy of that broader, sort of higher level document that we created. And as you'll see, I describe it as higher level because it's really more policy areas that the next state administration could consider in helping to advance agriculture in the state. But there are not a lot of very specific policy changes described in the document. And then we would sort of flesh out that document through this outreach process. I also wanted to just note that the categories, the policy categories in the document, which include things like enhancing the profitability of farmers and supporting the next generation of farmers, those are taken from the strategic plan of the Agricultural Council of Maine, or AgCom, because there was a fair amount of farmer input that went into creating that document as well, and so it seemed like a natural fit to outline our document according to those categories too. So even though this document, as you'll see, is just really the initial working draft, the starting point of this conversation that we're going to start having with farmers and then share with the next administration, we did share it with all primary candidates in the gubernatorial race. And the reason we did that, well, there are a couple of reasons. The first being that there seemed like a real need to educate the candidates about the policy changes that were needed in the agricultural sector and the challenges and the opportunities that were facing the agricultural sector. And it seemed like during the primary it was a good time to really engage in that kind of educational effort. And at the same time, because we had reached consensus about certain policy areas that we felt were really important to highlight, we felt like it was also a good opportunity to highlight those areas for the primary candidates. But when we did share this initial draft, we also let them know about the outreach effort that we're planning. And I want to focus on that for a couple of minutes as well. Several members of the working group that helped to create the platform, in addition to Cooperative Extension and AgCom, Agricultural Council of Maine, We're organizing 7 in-person meetings with farmers and other ag stakeholders across the state. That'll happen between November and January. And it'll be a really great opportunity to get input from those farmers about what this type of platform really needs to highlight. We're also organizing some webinars and another online survey and a paper survey that we'll be distributing. Just trying different methods to get as much input as possible from as many farmers as possible and as many different types of farmers as possible. And then through that process, we're hoping that we'll be able to see sort of what are the policy changes that have been receiving a lot of support from or have a lot of support from farmers across the state, and then we'll use those ideas to in our discussions with the next state administration. The exact dates for the in-person meetings have not been set, but Abby is also passing around a flyer that contains an email address and a Facebook page. And I would encourage everyone to really stay connected with the planning process, because as soon as we have those dates selected, we would love everyone's involvement in helping to promote those meetings and just making sure that the farmers in your communities and in your networks are aware of this effort and are involved. Penny.
Good afternoon, my name is Penny Jordan, and I am one of the owners of Jordan's Farm in Cape Elizabeth. We're a 5th generation mixed vegetable operation, selling mostly retail, but we also do wholesale production, probably over 20-25 different products. We also purchase from a number of farms that probably about 20 different farms in order to keep our year-round market operating. And I get the privilege every day to work with my brother who's the real farmer. I always say I'm the voice of Jordan's Farm, but he's the one who really makes it happen. I will say that Jordan's Farm has always been, I think it's in our blood, involved in policy, whether it be policy at the local level, state level, or the national level. It's something that was imparted to us that if you are going to have a successful business, you need to influence the things that can impact your business operation. And we try to do that every day. Today I was asked to talk about what policy is at the state level, but if I have time, I'd like to touch a bit on what's happening in many communities across the state that we as farmers need to engage in order that we ensure the viability of the farms across the state. Southern Maine gets a lot of pressure and compression, and so we're constantly aware of what's happening there. I'll also indirectly touch a bit on national things, because there are national policies that really influence some of our state policy. And as we look at what we need in our state in support of agriculture, I don't just think about what are the things that help me put seed in the ground. What I look at are policies that impact, whether it be labor or taxation, or anything that touches our business. So when I look at what's happening across the state and some of the challenges in the rural parts of the state, as we look at the next round of legislation, we truly need to put some meat and traction behind the broadband and cellular issues that are in the rural parts of our state. And I constantly say in Southern Maine that that's not just a Northern Maine issue, it's an agricultural issue, and it's something that we need to do to ensure that we are growing the food that we want in this state and that everybody is able to participate in the marketplace on equal footing. So as you see these things, whether you are a farmer or you're a person who has a strong relationship to a farm, be aware that those are the things that are in front of the legislature that we need to make sure are funded and passed. Another program, as we think about innovation, and farms are constantly redefining themselves, because as you look at as you look at a farm, if they stay stagnant and they don't respond to market and they don't respond to the dynamics that are going on, then they're going to atrophy. So programs such as Farms for the Future becomes really important, especially as farms transition from generation to generation or new farmers come into the state. To have the ability to access a program that will help you build a business plan so that your farm can be successful and that you know you're meeting the needs in the marketplace, it's these types of programs that are going to help our farms truly innovate. The other thing is there's the Ag Marketing Loan Fund. That's a fund and a program that becomes really important as you look at expanding or diversifying your business. I know we had the opportunity to access this program in order to implement a year-round store in South Portland, Maine. It became really important to us because what we needed to do is position our business for the next generation, and the only way to do that was to make sure we had market for our product. So there are many other farms out there who access the Ag Marketing Loan Fund, whether it be for potato houses or for any number of things as they look at what are the needs for their business in order to stay successful. Another thing that we constantly need to think about is market development. What are some of the things that we can do from the ground up as well as the top down in order to create market and to open markets that are outside of the state of Maine, outside of the United States? And we need to look at how we in Maine agriculture can move our products in the most efficient way in order to get them to a broader market. And I think you'll see more and more that we're going to be looking outside of the state for market expansion. And we look to the Commissioner's office and we look to the legislature to kind of help us open up those markets. The other thing that as we think about, and this is something that over the past many years, several years, cooperative extension and the University of Maine have started to be underfunded. Those are integral to farms being able to look at what is the change. I will tell you that in Cape Elizabeth I now feel like I'm farming in New Jersey in the summertime because it is so dry. And we tend to try to not use the term climate change, but there's a change going on that is impacting agriculture. And it's really the university's cooperative extension and other research that we need in order to help us. What are the new seeds that we might need, the new products we might need? What are some products that we may not have grown in Maine that we could grow in Maine now because of that shift in climate? And so we look to the university, we look to cooperative extension, and we look to many of those things in order to truly help us identify how do we change and respond to what that climate is telling us. It also helps us as we look at, and I will let a northern Mainer talk more about this, but in northern Maine, what are some of the products that we can bring on board that are rotation products that you can then use and sell? And so how can the university and the cooperative extension help us test out some of those? A big thing that's going to be impacting many farms over the next couple of years, I know it will be impacting ours next year, is the implementation of the Food Safety Modernization Act. And if you're a farm of a certain size, it's coming at us. And so we need to have help and assistance in and I will say that you will probably see some farms access the Ag Marketing Loan Fund in order to be able to position itself to respond to what FSMA is going to require of mid-size and larger farms. Another thing is that we really need to pay attention to, and this is something that we will be sending, I hope, to the state this year, is taxation. One of the things that happens when you have tax reform is there may be a ripple effect into agriculture, and we need to make sure that the exemptions that we have worked so hard to have are not impacted by tax reform, and they could be. And so pay attention as you hear more and more about tax reform and how it's going to be implemented. What will that impact be on agriculture? And so that's kind of one of those red flags that we should all be paying attention to, because those exemptions are so important as you're looking at what are the products, what are the things you need to purchase, the inputs to your products in order to grow the food to feed people. And the more expensive those inputs are, the more expensive food will become. So those tax exemptions are really important to us. Another thing is energy and energy costs. I think last session there was a lot of discussion around net metering and offset so that we will be implementing solar. I will tell you that solar is something that we really need to be looking seriously at. It's something that now what we do is it's a cost shift, but there should be more incentives for us to be shifting. And so as you see legislation come forward this session, pay attention. Anything that has to do with solar that could be a benefit to reducing that cost of input of electricity. And I will tell you, electricity on a vegetable farm is probably a lot less than a dairy farm, but I know it's significant. Another thing that we need to think about is, and it comes up every session, is land for Maine's future. That's how we're going to work to ensure that we will have agricultural land working for perpetuity. We did that at our farm in Cape Elizabeth. I'm a strong supporter of land for Maine's future. It is a program that can benefit many farms, and I think that we need to ensure that is constantly funded. The other thing that I think about, and so I'm going to shift to my local level, that you need to pay attention at the local level. You need to pay attention to those ordinances that could impact agriculture. We were lucky enough to be able to, the farmers came together and worked to craft the ordinances or help craft the ordinances that are used in Cape Elizabeth. And farms in Cape Elizabeth are in residential zones, so we get a lot of exemptions there in order that we keep farms viable. But as you see these neighborhoods popping up and impinging on farms, and you can't have your goats, or sorry, you can only have 3 pigs. I mean, as those neighborhoods pop up, you need to be very vigilant about what the impact is going to be to agriculture. And it's happening in Windham and Buxton and Standish and all of these areas that we thought that wouldn't be impacted. A connection from a federal level to our state level is, of course, that connection of REAP, which is helps in implementing solar or any other energy efficiencies on your farms. And so that connection between what legislation that we can put into place at a state level to incent the transition to solar or wind or something, REAP at a federal level is important, so pay attention to that. The other thing that at a federal level, that as you look at Farm Bill, etc., NRCS programs are important to farms, and to have any of those impacted through a Farm Bill would be a travesty. And so we need to be looking at those programs that have to do with our high dental programs, our erosion control, our soil enhancements, any of those things that would be beneficial to farms and would help them have greater yield, season extension, any number of things. The other programs that are important at a federal level are the local food promotions program. This allows market. It allows you to develop mini processing facilities on your farm. It helps you develop marketing programs to reach a greater number of customers. All of these things, and as I look at each of the programs and you look at what it does to enhance your ability to run a successful operation, those are the things we continually need to pay attention to. But you need to pay attention to policy across all spectrums. And labor is another thing. Labor is really important to farms at this point. There's a shortage of labor. We know that we could ideally develop training programs, ideally, but we also want to bring in and leverage skilled resources. And so I look at how can the state influence the federal level to ensure that farms have the labor that they need in order to produce the food that people in the state want to purchase. So I could go on and on about policy. Did you want me to keep going?
Thank you so much, Penny. That was great. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that if we have some time for Q&A, people will want to follow up. But if that's okay for this first stretch, then thank you so much, and we can move on to Ben.
Hi everybody, my name is Ben Whalen. I'm one of the 4 owners of Bumbleroot Organic Farm in Windham. And I'm just gonna, as Penny kind of described, there are so many programs out there that farmers benefit from, and so many policy decisions that affect us on a daily basis. I'm going to try to focus on what's affecting the next generation of farmers. What are the needs of young farmers kind of starting out who think they want to start a farm, who just started a farm, and what some of the programs that already exist to help those farmers succeed. So I'm just going to kind of tell our story as a farm and how we got to where we are, and kind of check off all the things that we benefited from, the programs that we've used to get to where we are today. So we're in our 4th year as a farm. Like I said, there's 4 owners. We all met in Colorado, and we ended up in Maine in a large part because of MOFGA. When we were casting a wide net over New England to start a farm, the community that existed in Maine that we heard about through MOFGA was outstanding. And after farming in 4 different states across the country, and after moving here, it's apparent that there's nothing else in the country like this, and a lot of that has to do with the work that MOFGA is doing. So we started our farm, and one of the first challenges that we hit that almost every single young farmer faces is securing land. It's really hard to find affordable land. We were looking in southern Maine, and so because we couldn't afford land right off the bat, we decided to lease. We found a property, a 3-acre property that already had a business on it, and we signed a lease, and we spent 8 months planning to farm on that property. And 2 weeks before we were going to move to the house that we had a separate lease on, the landowner backed out of the lease. After we had plowed the fields, cover cropped, done all this work, she saw what a field, a real farm looked like in her backyard, and she realized our presence wasn't going to work for her. So immediately we scrambled, trying to figure things out. We reached out to MFT, talking to Land for Good, trying to figure out what our options were. And the landlord in our other home said, you know what, we've got a backyard, you guys can farm that. So he said, it's a good place to start. We built a greenhouse, plowed that field, got some cover crop in, but it was a little under an acre, which was not financially feasible for us to start our business with that. And it was at that time that we applied to the MOFGA Journey Person program. And the program, kind of the highlights from the Journey Person program are getting paired with a mentor. And being from out of state, we were immediately plugged into a community that we called all of our neighboring farms. We were told, call this person, check this, do that, to try to find other land to farm. We were also given educational stipends, so we were able to purchase books, go to attend conferences, things like that. And then the most important part, I think, from the Journey Person program is we get plugged into this online email listserv for everyone who's ever graduated the Journeyperson program or who's been a mentor. And that resource is one of the most used, most unbelievably valuable resources for me as a young organic farmer. We receive multiple emails a day of people just asking questions, having comments, wondering what people are doing. It's raining a lot. What are people doing for certain crops? Where are they getting their irrigation supplies? Things like that. And that's all through MOFGA's Journeyperson program. So that helped us plug immediately into the organic farming community in Maine. And kind of set us on our way. And within about 6 months of being on the property that we were, our little backyard farm, the landowner told us they were going to sell the property, and they wanted us to buy it, which was not an option at the time. So we immediately started looking for our next future farm, about 8 months after starting on this piece of property. And that's when we reached out to Maine Farm Trust. First, we found a beautiful, beautiful 80-acre property in Windham, Maine, and we met with the two sisters who were selling it. Their father had passed away. It was a historical dairy farm. And they gave us the tour. They told us the story of the land. Told us what it was like growing up there, hay in the fields, working with the animals. And at the end, they told us what it cost. And it was way outside of our price range. It was our dream farm, but there's no possible way we could afford it being 8 months into starting our first business. So we said, all right, we're going to keep looking. Thanks for showing us around. And that fall, we took the Farm Beginnings course that's sponsored by MOFGA as well, which is a winter course. I think it's 10 weeks. And the purpose of that is to train farmers who are either about to start a farm business or who are already farming, kind of hone their business skills. And after that 10 weeks, you walk out the door with a workable business plan. And during that process of learning what a cash flow statement is, how to use QuickBooks, all these things that were at that point flying by the seat of our pants to run our business, Maine Farm Trust actually got in touch with the sisters of the property that we originally looked at, and they decided that they were going to purchase the property, put an ag easement on, and then sell it back to a farmer. And there's a lot to go into on that with the programming that they use for that. But we applied for the program, or sent in a proposal for the land. We won the application process. A huge part of that was being able to take the business plan that we did in the farm beginning class and hand it directly to MFT. In that process, we worked with CEI, who is a lender that is they work with underserved industries in Maine, and so they're mission driven, and there's a whole agriculture and fisheries side of their business, and they were helping us workshop the business plan that we took from the farm's beginning class. We took it to CEI. They sent us to this at Small Business Development Center in Portland. They helped us, and then we handed that to Maine Farm Trust, and then they said, you guys can farm this property, which was awesome. Part of the easement process with the land that we have, it's not just a traditional agricultural easement, but there's a program called OPAV. It stands for Option to Purchase at Agricultural Value. So a traditional ag easement, and correct me if I don't get this totally right, a traditional ag easement is just a lot like a conservation easement, but it's focused on the agricultural production of the land. What the OPAV does is it's an added layer on top of that, and it basically ensures that Maine Farm Trust has the first right of refusal if we were to ever to sell the farm, to ensure that whoever is going to purchase the farm is going to be actively farming that land. So it's not just this land can never be developed, it's this land, the goal is to make sure that the land is always actively farmed. And that's an MFT program that they're starting to use a lot more on the street. So we got on our new farm. We're going to be there for hopefully the next 100 years, 50 years, however long we go. And now we're starting to realize what we need as our operation is growing. And some federal programs like the NRCS High Tunnel program, that's something that we've really benefited from. It's trying to figure out financing. We just talked with the FSA, working with CEI, trying to find these avenues to be able to get the capital to help our business grow. And really, those are the challenges that young farmers are facing. The major takeaways, it's trying to find land. Our situation is incredibly unique, and we are super lucky that it kind of unfolded the way it did. The opportunities that just happened to present themselves in our timeline were perfect. But there's so many farmers, friends of ours who are farming right now that are on this land, that are trying to figure out how to transition, whether they're leasing or working with an older family member, or leasing from an older neighbor, or just a regular lease, trying to transition that land to ownership, or figuring out how to make sure that they have the security to be on that land, to be able to make the investments to let their business grow. And that's the largest, hardest thing that young farmers are dealing with. And the next thing is just financial security. It's being able to find capital to start your farm and let your farm grow. It's working with people like the FSA, people like CEI, lenders who are going to take risks on young farmers who don't have a lot of collateral up front to start a business. And then the other big thing is just training. Farmers, a lot of the young farmers that we know have worked for years on farms all over the country, and they have the tangible, hard skills of farming. It's those business skills to successfully run a business once you actually get on land that is really, really critical. And those are the big takeaways. All of that funding, it comes from all different levels. Kind of what Penny was saying, even on municipal levels, trying to deal with local ordinances that are going to affect your farms positively or negatively. These are all things that we have to deal with, and it's just being active and vocal, I think, is one of the most important things, even if you're not a farmer, just to be aware that if farming is important to you, these are the things that you need to be aware of and advocate for on a regular basis.
Thank you, Ben. Great, and Ben is one example of a very successful new farmer in Maine, and I think that's important for folks to know that the demographics in Maine are very encouraging with the number of new people who are new farmers and young farmers that are positioning themselves to take our agriculture into the future, and so congratulations on the successes that you've had. That's really exciting. And so now we have Jim Gerritsen, and you can take it away.
So I think Penny and Ben did a good job talking about some of the challenges that are faced in Maine by farmers, especially young farmers. And I wanted to look a little bit more broadly on a national basis. But first I wanted to start with a story. How many of you know who Wendell Berry is? Is that name familiar? Okay, fair number. For those who don't know, Wendell Berry is a farmer in Kentucky. He's now in his mid-80s, but probably for the last 50 years, no one in this country has been more outspoken in advocating for the permanence of family farming. And for many of us, he's been a mentor and a hero of ours. So I want to relate a story back in the early 1980s, up in Aroostook County, where we have a potato farm. We have a 115-acre potato farm, half in woods, half in fields, all of it MOFGA-certified. So I had a friend that was an English professor at the college in Presque Isle, University of Maine, Presque Isle. And he, that year, was the head of the outside speakers committee. And he asked me who would be a good speaker to bring in, and I said, well, bring in Wendell Berry. So in the fall of 1984, 34 years ago, we had Wendell Berry in Aroostook County for 3 days. And many of us had read his epic work written in the 1970s. It took him 10 years to write it, but the title of that book is The Unsettling of America. And it was a landmark work that explained the societal and policy shifts that basically were at work in the United States. And the effect of it was a liquidation of family farmers. So one of the evenings that we had Wendell Berry, the art department people were in the kitchen, and there were about 8 or 10 of us organic farmers sitting in the living room with Wendell Berry talking. And one of the things that he said was that the bad farmers have already left agriculture. And I bring this up. This was 34 years ago, a generation and a half ago. Yet you still hear on the national level the propaganda coming from industrial agriculture that we need to liquidate these ineffective family farmers and develop more efficient, from a production standpoint, a more efficient agriculture that means more concentration and fewer farmers. And the point I want to make is that one of the greatest visionaries within American agriculture in the last 100 years, 34 years ago, was telling us that the bad farmers had already exited. So what that means is the farmers that are being forced out of agriculture now, the family farmers, these are the best farmers around. And it's not the fault of those farmers going out, it's the fault of bad policy. And most of the bad policy that we as farmers suffer from is federal policy on a national level. So there's things that we can do to make Maine a better state, and as Ben has said, and as Penny has described with all the programs and the great things we have going in Maine, Maine is way ahead of the curve. We're the best state in the union in terms of developing and cultivating and incubating organic farmers, and we're to be congratulated from that. And with good leadership in the Blaine House and in the legislature, we can do a lot of things in Maine. However, that said, you can't escape from the reality that federal policy, going back to the Farm Bill of 1952, in which the federal cheap food policy was initiated, so that's 66 years ago, family farmers in this country have been fighting unfair federal policy that has been directed at advantaging industrial agriculture and food production and industrial food in terms of processing and the sale of food. And that has had a real impact on the health of agriculture in Maine. And let me give you an example. 40 years ago, in the mid-1970s, the state of Maine grew 147,000 acres of potatoes. And potatoes is our main crop. It's the main crop in Aroostook County. It's absolutely critical to the economy. So 147,000 acres, and that acreage was grown by 1,200 to 1,500 potato farmers. So what do we have today? We're down to 50,000 acres, a third of what we had 40 years ago. But we have 100 potato farmers left, down from 12 to 1,500, down to 100 potato farmers. So as the numbers of acres have gone down, much more dramatically the number of farmers have gone down, and in relation the average size of those farms have gone up dramatically, so that back 40 years ago a typical farm would be growing 100 acres of potatoes. Now they're growing something like 600 to 800 acres of potatoes. In the Midwest, with the introduction of GMO crops in the mid-1990s, what you might have nowadays, say 5,000 acres, that back in the mid-90s, before the GMO crops came in, and most of the GMO crops are herbicide tolerant, Roundup ready crops that allow a farmer to spray this herbicide on the corn and the soybeans, and it kills the weeds, but it doesn't kill the crop. So up till the mid-90s, you might have 5,000 acres, 2,500 acres of corn, 2,500 acres of soybean being farmed by 10 different family farmers. Now, that same 5,000 acres will be farmed by one operation. 2,500 acres of corn, 2,500 acres of soybeans, all of it genetically engineered, all of it sprayed with Roundup. So, it's my understanding and assertion that it's bad federal policy that has created the mess that we're in, and that mess is liquidation of family farmers. And I think that the era that we're in right now is the beginning of a major crisis. Some of you may have even heard this in the news. Grain farmers in the Midwest have experienced their fourth year in a row of below cost of production. The average income, the median income for farmers this year, I think, is minus $1,500 in the United States. So that means after all is said and done, farmers, for the privilege of working 365 days a year, have lost $1,500 for their dollars for their effort. So, to my estimation, there are three important factors that have led to this farm crisis going on now. One is consolidation, and it's consolidation, as I said, both within farm production by industrial ag, with federal policy leaning towards that benefit, and concentration in food processing and in food retailing. Look around now, we've got Shaw's and we've got Hannafords in Maine. A generation, 2 generations ago, we had many small chains. In Aroostook County, we had Sampson's, we had First National. All of those stores are gone, so that now we have Hannafords and there's some IGAs. That's the same thing throughout Maine. That means less opportunity for food producers to sell to when there are fewer and fewer buyers. And the buyers, what we've learned in 40 years of farming organically, is the big boys like to play with the big boys. And if you're not a big boy, they're not going to pay any attention to you. And it becomes that much more difficult trying to sell crops. So that leads to my second point. There's declining market now, declining market share and declining prices because of this consolidation that's going on. And at the same time, and I think Ben alluded to this, you've got these increasing costs. Penny talked about the labor costs. Many of us supported the increase of the minimum wage in Maine, which is now working its way up to $12 an hour. It'll be $11 an hour next January, and the January after that, it'll be at $12 an hour. Most farmers that I know, we're not making minimum wage. So we either don't pay ourselves for the hours that we work, and the reason I voted in favor of the minimum wage is that I think that's a fair wage approaching a living wage and what people should get paid. Even though farmers don't earn it, it's something to strive for. But it is becoming not only more difficult to find workers, and as the minimum wage goes up, then all wages go up, and farm production is only really able to pay a certain amount based on the crop and the farm gate income. So I think that we're in for an increasing challenge with labor, and some of the solution that we've implemented on our farm is to become more and more mechanized. And one of the concerns that I have individually is the development of robotics. I am convinced, if you study the history of agriculture, mechanization, there's been a continuing line of mechanization, and I think robotics is going to be the next generation. And I've been argued with by friends that think that I'm overestimating this, but my interpretation is that the business plans of those inventing robotics are going to come in with models that are going to be $1 to $2 million out of the scale of affordability for family farms. So my concern is that as time goes by, it's going to become that much more difficult with unavailability of labor. Systems are going to shift to more robotics. For example, robotic apple pickers are on the verge of being available, but those are going to run $1 to $2 million, and it's going to be a certain size operation that can afford that. The small operations that can't find labor to pick the crop are going to be disadvantaged. So Ben related, the situation with land tenure is really, really serious, and given the modest capability of generating income on the farm, it's a real crunch. But back in the mid-70s, to use some more numbers, we were able to buy the beginnings of our farm at $150 an acre. And now that price, that same price land would be anywhere from, in Aroostook County, 10 to 20 times that, $1,500 to $3,000, which still by national measure is still a great bargain. But it just becomes that much more difficult for farmers that are already struggling with very often high student debt, high health care costs, and high land costs. That land tenure thing is something that, it's hard for me to conceive. We have the benefit of having a house that we built on land that we own, and our commute is walking out the front door and we're at work. And I know a lot of young people strive for that, and it's hard to imagine for me as a landowning farmer to have a farm that you don't own. So I wanted to get in a little bit, and I could go and talk at much greater depth, but I don't think that this is the right forum for that. But I want to address some of the problems on that federal level. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture, known in agriculture as USDA, they're a major part of the problem. And while I say that, I want to acknowledge that the individuals that I know and interact with here in Maine are wonderful people. The frontline employees of USDA are doing it because they want to try to help, but the political leaders in Washington, D.C. Are using USDA. It basically has become a rogue agency that does not adhere to the law and works as a disadvantage to farmers. And I'll cite as an example the National Organic Program, which is the department of the USDA, which regulates the organic industry, is refusing to enforce requirements in the law under the Organic Foods Production Act that, if enforced, would practically prevent any CAFO, concentrated animal feeding operation, a feedlot, from being within the organic system. So what we have now, like some of you have heard of the dairy crisis that we have both within conventional agriculture and within organic agriculture. Within organic agriculture, it's claimed that we have a milk glut. Well, this so-called milk glut is created by these illegal, fraudulent CAFO dairy operations, primarily in the West, that are milking 10,000 cows, sometimes even more than that. And by the experts within the organic industry have told me that there's no way that you can have a truly organic operation that is abiding by the requirements of a size greater than 1,000 cows. And here you've got operations that are 10,000 cows and more, that are not giving their cows outside access, that are not giving the cows an important component of their feed from pasture. And these are operations that have never met the organic requirements, yet USDA is allowing them to be certified, allowing their milk to be sold. And when you go to the stores like Wal-Mart and Hannaford's, those house brand milks, milk is coming from these corporate operations. So what do we have in Maine? We've got honest Maine dairy farmers going out of business because they're on quota, they've been cut back how much their buyer is willing to buy from them, and they're paying less for that milk price because of that fraudulent milk. In other words, Maine farmers doing the job right, treating their animals with respect and according to the organic standards, they're going out of business because USDA is unwilling to enforce the requirement. And I think that is really outrageous, but it's a correction that needs to be done on the federal level. It's not simply a state deal. So akin to that is this development of monopoly control. We have had on the books antitrust legislation that should be enforced by the U.S. Department of Justice, and they're asleep at the wheel. Just recently, the Department of Justice allowed the merger of Monsanto and Bayer. Now, I think of the big six agrochemical and biotech companies that existed 3 years ago, I think we're now down to 4 because of merging of Dow and DuPont, Bayer and Monsanto. What this means is not only less competition, which will be higher prices that farmers pay for seed and inputs, but it's also going to be higher prices that consumers have to pay for food. But importantly, beyond that, when you get concentrated control, that concentrated control buys the decision-making of our national Congress and really the executive branch as well. So there are inherent problems with monopoly control, That's why they created the antitrust division, and it's not only under Mr. Trump that there's been this ignoring of antitrust, but under Democrats as well. But this monopoly control is making it that much harder for family farmers to exist.